even if as a freelancer, if you don't feel slightly uncomfortable saying your fee out loud, then you're probably too cheap.
Welcome to Aha Moments podcast with me, Kobi Omenaka. In this episode, I'm talking with Charles Burdett, the founder of Pip Decks.
If I was to, someone was to tell me that you're going to start a business where you're selling hundreds of thousands of card decks for £150 each, I would have been like, with cartoon characters on. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
We'll get into Charles' background and talk about him being a UX designer and what that even meant when he first started doing it, because it wasn't really even a job title at the time.
And then you arrive at the BBC, and then you kind of look at the other seniors around you and you're like, oh right, job titles are kind of meaningless.
We then go into talking about how he founded Pip Decks and something that was essentially a side hustle and how it became his main gig. Also in this conversation is a masterclass on understanding your customer and how Charles got to his aha moment and understanding what they really wanted from it. I hope you enjoyed the whole episode, and do get in contact with Charles. All of his details are in the show notes at the bottom. And hey, buy a set of Pip Decks. Well, Charles, thank you very much for joining me on Aha Moments podcast. We know each other because our kids go to the same school. We're actually in the same class at the moment. And it's been great to get to know you over the past year or so as that's happening. Thank you very much for joining me.
That's all right. Thanks for having me.
I remember one of our first conversations as you start going to lots and lots of these kids' parties, and you told me about Pip Decks. And the first thing he said to me was, have you heard about Pip Decks? And I was like, should I have exactly? And then the day after, I got an advert for Pip Decks.
It's the conspiracy of your phone listening to you in action.
We'll get to Pip Decks because I think your story is like fascinating. I think it's really interesting. But I'd love to get a bit about your background and how you got to where you are in the first place. So, a risk of sounding like a bit of a CV interviewer for your first round interview. Can you tell us a bit about your education background and what you did before starting Pip Decks?
Yeah, so I did a graphic design degree at Sheffield Hallam University, and my career aspirations was to be an animator.
Oh wow!
And I actually did do a fair bit of sort of hand-drawn animation, and I actually was signed up to go and do a master's in animation after my degree, but due to some bizarre circumstances, I ended up not getting on the course and having signed a lease on a house that I was planning on paying for with the student loan that I'd be getting for the master's, which I was no longer getting. So I emergency needed to find a job in graphic design. And so my career kind of started out as a junior designer at a digital agency in Manchester, where I worked on websites and apps and things like that. And this was really before the job title of UX designer or user experience designer was really a thing.
So it was wholesale graphic design was the job you applied for?
Well, my job title was junior digital designer. And it was basically someone that worked on websites and apps. And user experience was like this emerging kind of niche, more highly paid discipline. And my portfolio from university days was like an eclectic mix of weird websites and animation. And basically I got turned down to so many interviews, like for in-house design roles at like a waste management company and an outdoor manufacturer, clothes manufacturer. Because they looked at my portfolio and they're like, we just need someone to kind of come and do letterheads and like corporate branding and stuff like that. So I fit right into like a weird kind of digital agency and got to work on some really cool stuff. And that's kind of where I cut my teeth in the world of like user experience design and designing websites and learning about, how to get a user to kind of convert on a website or to successfully use a product and understand, user needs and understanding customer research and all this sort of thing. And then after a few years of that, I managed to get a job at the BBC as a senior user experience designer. And I worked on BBC Bite Size, BBC Food and things like that. And this was much...
So these are their websites and also their kind of digital channels.
Yeah, so BBC Bite Size is BBC's kind of main education product for kids in the UK. For GCSEs and stuff like that. And it's quite an institution, really. And we didn't stay there very long because it was quite a drag from a kind of political point of view. And then I took the leap into contracting, and sort of all the experience I'd gained from working with so many different clients, agency side, and a brief stint in kind of the big corporate is what I would call the BBC. Went and started contracting as a UX designer. So I was kind of planted myself into different businesses on short-term contracts, and that's kind of where the Piptecks story starts, really. But I think along the way, throughout my career as a designer, like you kind of start out like you and your laptop designing, squirreling away, making great looking designs, and then working with developers to make those designs. But as my career kind of evolved and grew, I realized that the more powerful and higher leverage thing to do as a designer was to bring other people into your design process and run workshops and like bring in key stakeholders and get their kind of point of view, bringing in customers and, problem solving together as a team. And so throughout my career as a UX designer and an agency in the BBC and contracting, like I picked up so many kind of workshops that as a designer was really helpful to actually bring people together to like actually design stuff better than just doing it on your own. And this was sort of around the era of design sprints kind of really coming out as well. So yeah, that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of my...
No, I love it. And yeah. I'm a big cinephile, and I have to ask, what kind of animation were you looking to do? What kind of thing were you looking to do with your animation degree going forward?
I had no idea. I was just trying to avoid the real world and stay in education. I mean, my biggest love animation-wise is any Studio Ghibli work.
Right. So Miyazaki and Clan, yeah.
Like the YouTube channel that I ended up doing as a side project for a number of years is like so embarrassing that I will not share that with anyone. It still exists, and if you know me, you probably know what I'm talking about. But definitely no links in the show notes to that one.
If anyone here does find that YouTube channel, please send us a message. I would definitely want to know what it is and see what kind of things can manifest it from your mind. I want to go down the agency route because it's a big kind of topic of discussion for people coming into a lot of different careers. Do they go straight into an agency or do they go in-house? And there's never seems to be a clear yes or no which way you should go. I think a lot of it comes down to personality. But one thing I do find that's almost consistent is that people who do go into an agency, they get so much experience funneled into them that you can't help but take that away. And if you think actually agency is not for me, gained a lot of experience in that time across a broad range of things, which then helps you pivot into other areas. And when you talk about how you did these workshops and you work with a variety of people and bring these things together, I think that's probably a lot of it's come from that agency experience, right? Where you're having to speak to different types of clients, different types of stakeholders, internal and external, different types of projects, people with different sets of mindsets, and you have to try and get everyone onto the same page and facing in the same direction. Does that kind of make sense?
100%. And I think with an agency, the velocity of the work and what's at stake as well is much higher. Like an agency needs to close clients, it needs to deliver the work, and it needs to move fast to make that happen. And you do need to kind of be able to work at that pace. And because of that pace, there's so much of it, and there's a variety of work, and the people come and go. You realize is, not all clients are created equal. Whereas in the corporate kind of world, you might be working on something for 6 months in a tiny team. There's no urgency. And at the BBC, there's no like, we need to be making profit. There's none of that. There's kind of like just moving at snail's pace. And I worked on something for 6 months, and then someone came in one day and said, we're not doing that anymore. And it just went in the bin. And it's like, whoa, like it's completely different. And that was just like one project. Whereas in that same time frame at an agency, you might have done like 10. And it's just a completely different thing. And I think the other kind of like lens to put over that is like, are you in an office or are you remote? Because if I was to start my career again today, remote at an agency, I would definitely not be the same person. Like being in an office around creative people at an agency was like the best upbringing for me. And I would recommend it to any creative person, like be in person. Like, and I'm saying this as someone who has a company that's fully remote, that I do think there is huge value in just living and breathing. And, I met my wife at the agency, and some of our closest friends also met. So like, it's for us, it was like a real kind of familial kind of upbringing.
But you're kind of reaping those rewards now of having that experience, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's many people who've got their opinions about remote versus home working. I feel that we are of a similar generation of age now that we've been working so long that working at home makes sense. You can just get on with the job. But I think people graduating now into their first roles, guys, try and be in the office as much as possible, be around people as much as possible, because just even seeing what's going on someone else's screen is can be a game changer for your understanding. Asking those questions ad hoc. Often these questions just aren't limited to that time you have on Teams, that regular stand-up thing. It has to be that interaction, those interactions you have making tea or coffee. And I've gone down the office versus remote track. I don't know why, but something clearly I feel passionate about. So with the agency side of things, so when you moved the agency to the BBC and then you went contracting, did you feel confident in your abilities as a contractor, or is it I need a change and let's just try this piece?
Every step of the way was terrifying. Like moving from when I was at the agency and I applied for the senior role at the BBC, I applied kind of as a joke. I was like, there's no way I could like call myself a senior UX designer without laughing. And then I got the job. And then you arrive at the BBC, and then you kind of look at the other seniors around you and you're like, oh, right, job titles are kind of meaningless. Like the varying levels of experience and ability. I'm like, oh, my job title means nothing. That kind of like shocked me a bit because I really revered these titles that people had. Yeah, then the grass sort of starts growing between your toes at a place like that. But even the leap to go contracting was terrifying. Like leaving a nicely paid job at the BBC to go and start working on a 3-month contract where after that you don't have a job.
The void.
Or you don't know if it's going to get renewed. There's this like massive void. Yeah, like you said. And it was a massive leap. But as soon as I made that leap and I was now working a contract, I felt way better because the way I described working a contract is like, it's like going to going to watch a film at a cinema and you know that the film's going to end in about an hour and a half. Whereas having a full-time job is like, you just don't know when the film's going to end. Like you're just there indefinitely until you have to have an awkward conversation with someone to try and leave. So I felt really comfortable knowing that there was an end with everything I was doing. And like my first contract kept getting renewed to the point where I'm like, actually, I don't want to renew it. I want to go somewhere else. And realizing that like, oh, right, I'm in control now of where I get to work. And I think that's when I started realizing that I could start believing in my ability a bit more. But every step of the way, from agency to BBC to contracting to Pip Decks, was like a series of tiny leaps of faith. And in hindsight, they were like not painful at all. But when you're there, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to go contracting. I have to set up a limited company that I have to operate out of. And I have to go and get an accountant and just all this stuff, right? That's scary. But I think those like tiny leaps of faith are kind of the acclimatizing yourself to just going into something and not knowing what's going to happen and building up that kind of
well, those leaps of faith are, like you say, they are scary. And if you look further back to GCSE to A-level to university, and then these steps, but we've kind of in the life that you've traveled, and it's very similar to myself in different aspects, but setting up a limited company now, it's here's a link, 5 minutes later you've got a limited company and your certificate will be in the post in a couple of days' time. And then when you do that, you'll get lots of accountants sending you emails or leaflets through the post. Suddenly it's like, oh, you're a limited company, you need an accountant. And then you pick one that kind of makes sense to you at the time. And of course you can pivot away from them at any other point as well. So I can understand at the point when you're at these key steps, it's what do I actually want to do this thing? But when you've taken that first step, it's, oh, okay, that's fine. And that's, agency to in-house, working life, generally that's a route many people take. Contracting is a route that not that many people take, but still quite a wide proportion of the population. But then into making your own company, leading into Piptecks, that's a step that fewer people take, and that's potentially the scariest one. So can you tell us about, I guess, where the formulation of Piptecks, how that started in the first place? And you said about it being related to creating workshops and trying to have a theme that people could work around. Yeah,
so workshopping was something that a skill and like a repository of tools, I guess, that you kind of pick up along the way. And so when I did start going contracting, like the culture at an agency and even the culture at the BBC, workshops were very normal. But when you go to places like, a big bank and you're working with a very green design team who are, are working in quite traditional ways. When you come in and start running a workshop and getting people to stand up and like write on post-its and put them on the wall, people are like, "What's going on here? Like, who is this guy who's not who's
I don't like this."
yeah, like I was the only one not wearing a suit and that kind of thing, and he's coming in here with like post-its and getting us to stand up. When you're in a well-run workshop, like I remember the first workshop I ever experienced as a junior designer, it was like being a part of a theater play. Like it felt so kind of structured and well timed that you just kind of breeze through this hour. And by the end of it, you've got like real tangible outcomes and decisions have been made. And like, you're like, whoa. And it was so productive and effective and fun. And I remember seeing that same kind of reaction from, these stuffy bankers being in a workshop for the first time, realizing like how much work they'd gotten done and how important it was that they had done that. And they started the meeting with, ties all the way up and like crossed arms, like, well, who's this guy? And then by the end of it, like all a bit looser and kind of like come round to the idea that this is actually amazing. And their only experience of a meeting is someone chairing a meeting and then like the loudest voice kind of dominating the room. Whereas in a workshop that, that I kind of go through, your input is in writing and it's like putting things up. And then the facilitator is actually managing the conversation. And so when I was running these workshops, the team I was working with were constantly asking me, how do you know how to run all these workshops? And can you help me learn? And I was like, yeah, okay. I kept being asked, like, what kind of workshop should I do for this? Or can you help me plan a workshop for that? And I was like, okay, look, let me just put everything I know into like a PDF. And then you can stop bothering me, because it was getting to the point where like that's all I was doing was like, oh, Charles, can you come help me do this workshop with with this team? So it really was to get people off my back. And
so hold on. So yeah. Pip Decks essentially started because people are hassling you, and you didn't want that to happen anymore.
Yeah, well, pretty much. And so I put everything I knew into one PDF, and I tried to write it in a manner that was like really clear, like step 1, do this, step 2, do this, what this workshop is and why you should use it, and maybe when you might think about using it. And people found it useful, but people still kept coming to me and saying, hey Charles, I've got your PDF, but like I don't know where to start, like which one should I start with? So I was like, okay, hang on a minute. So that's when I created this kind of flow chart, which basically asks you a question like, do you know what your team is working towards? If no, go and do a goals workshop in the goals category. But if you do know what you're working towards, do you understand the biggest problem that you're trying to solve? If no, go to the understand category. And they kind of work through this flow chart until they find the category that actually fits. Most people are like, actually, no, we don't know. We don't even know what problem we're trying to solve. So they usually kind of start near the top. But this really helped people with a starting point. And people kept coming to me less, but people still kept coming to me. And they kept saying to me, hey, Charles, I just ran this workshop and it went great. Like I picked the right one and it went really well. But now I don't know what to do next. So I was like, okay. And so that's when every workshop in the PDF became a bit of a choose your own adventure. So like I'd say, if you've done this, you probably want to now do this.
Okay.
And if you're going to do this, actually try and do this one beforehand, because you need the output from this workshop for this one to really make sense. And then when I'd done that, like people stopped coming to me and I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then that's when I was like, this could be a thing. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great as a deck of cards that you could just give someone a workshop? And so I think I've actually got a really early prototype.
Oh, I'd love to see it, yeah. So for you guys who are listening to this, Charles is about to show us exactly what Pip Decks was like at the start. If you want to watch this, it will be on YouTube and potentially on LinkedIn as well.
So this was given to a colleague of mine, Tom Walker. This is one of the first editions of Workshop Tactics. It doesn't even, well, I haven't looked at this in a while. It doesn't even have any illustrations on it yet.
Okay, so it's just pure text. Or some illustrations. Yeah.
There's some kind of sketchy illustrations, but most of them are like blank. But yeah, so I kind of designed it as being a designer. I'm like, what should this look like? What's the kind of typographical hierarchy? But it's fairly straightforward. It's just, step-by-step instructions on the back of the card. And so I made a bunch of these and gave them out, and with the intention of like coming back to everyone that was using it in, a few weeks' time and asked how they got on. and people were loving it. And
is this all within the same company at the moment?
I mean, the timelines are fuzzy because it was, a good 4 years ago, but I think this was sort of happening in between a couple of different contracts, basically. And one contract I was at over a year and a half or so. So there was one kind of testing ground that I was using it in. And again, this was only possible because I was actually working with people in an office to get this feedback. And this was all kind of pre-COVID as well. That wasn't even on the horizon. Yeah, to kind of cut a long story short, I just followed my curiosity of like, well, what if I got it printed to a high quality? Could I sell it? Would people even buy it? So before actually going to print, I mocked up like a landing page and designed the box I imagined it would be in 3D. So it didn't actually exist yet, but made it like a 3D rendered box. Mm-hmm. And then the landing page was really helpful because I was like, right, how do I actually sell this to someone on a sales landing page? And that really helped me kind of refine like the whole USP and everything like that.
And this is going back to a lot of your roots as a UX designer.
Yeah, and this is the sort of thing I was doing at an agency. And the UX process is like trying to reduce the risk of doing the wrong thing and finding the truth of the matter and all the rest of it. And so then I think I spent like 500 quid on LinkedIn ads, believe it or not, to this landing page. And all you could do was sign up to show your interest.
Sure.
And I got like a good few hundred people signing up.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, okay, people are interested in this. Because like I only had this bubble of people around me that were telling me to my face that they liked it. But like, people say things but do things different, maybe do things not what they say. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. There might be something here. And so then I kind of leaned into it more and actually did a pre-sale. So I was like, if I'm to truly de-risk doing this, what if I could get the money up front before I go to production with it? So I enabled people to buy this thing that didn't exist yet for more like the price is, that's a whole other podcast, the price of it. But for a price that I felt uncomfortable charging, it was like expensive for a deck of cards. And I turned on the pre-sale, emailed my list, and then nothing happened. Like there was no sales. And I was sat there thinking, okay, maybe this isn't the thing that I thought it would be. And then like a few minutes later, I heard this like cha-ching sound, which was the Shopify notification on my phone. And I remember the feeling of that first sale was like greater than any drug I've ever tried. I was like, oh my God, someone paid me for this thing that I've just created out of literal thin air. It felt.
Yeah. Do you have that first email from the first?
Yeah,
customer?
I probably do. Yeah. And then literally right after that, like a second cha-ching, and I was like, oh, another one. And like for the next hour, it was just cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And like I amassed enough sales. I'm talking thousands in revenue in one night.
Wow.
For enough to do like an initial print run of, because I'd already been like talking to a factory to get it made and that sort of thing. I was like, right, this is happening. And so going back to like, starting a business is quite a risky, scary thing that you kind of mentioned before. Like the story I've just told you was me like baby steps, like testing everything all that way and being worried and anxious and scared that whole way and thinking this isn't going to be a thing, but always just putting myself in a tiny bit of out of my comfort zone, but just testing the whole way. And so yeah.
Why did you go for LinkedIn ads first?
I don't know. I thought it's for professionals. Professionals are on LinkedIn. There was no more like great thought. In hindsight, LinkedIn ads are super expensive, and I probably should have done like Meta ads or Facebook at the time.
Well, I mean, it's completely worked for you, and that's a light bulb moment, and it got you to that point where you had that verification that there is something to this. Definitely.
Well, yeah, there's no better. This is the thing that as a UX designer that you learn that if people say, "Oh yeah, I would buy that," that is a different thing to someone actually parting with their money for it, because we cannot predict our own future behavior. And me saying to you, "Oh yeah, I would buy that," me actually buying it is a completely different thing.
That's one of the things I speak to people a lot about when you have customer interviews with people, your potential customer and client interviews. It's all about asking them specific questions for how they reacted to things in the past, not what they perceive that they're going to do in the future.
Yeah.
Because with the best will in the world, they can't predict the future. But
Well,
they can replay what they've done in the past.
Yeah. Like if I was to tell you, like, I'm definitely going to go to the gym tomorrow.
Yeah.
The actual reality of me going to the gym tomorrow is a different matter. Like I can't predict what I'm going to do in the future. No one can. I might wake up tomorrow and just not feel like it.
Yeah. 100%.
So
your kids might be ill and you have to take the time off work and you can't do that. But then you could talk about the time you went to the gym yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. And
say what led up to that and why you went to the gym yesterday and how you felt about it and what you did.
And just on the pricing, like that's one of the biggest mistakes. And I did make this. I did ask people, like, what would you pay for this? And people said, £12, £20. I'm like, I don't think that's going to work. Like, plugging in the numbers in a spreadsheet, like, I don't think that price is going to work. But like, if you'd believed that, this isn't going to work because people said that they wouldn't buy it for more than £12, you would have just killed the business in the water. But like, we're selling card decks for £150. And it's like, if I was to, someone was to tell me that you're going to start a business where you're selling hundreds of thousands of card decks for £150 each, I would have been like, with cartoon characters on. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I think that's the thing I enjoy the most about business, is that like the things that don't make sense are sometimes the things that are the most popular. Like Red Bull is objectively disgusting, but it's like the second most popular soft drink in the world. Do you know what I mean? So
well, when you put it with vodka, then it takes on a whole different entity. Recently you posted on LinkedIn about using Kickstarter early on to help kind of get you to where you are now. And I've known a few people who've done Kickstarter and have made a business out of it. And I've known a few people who've done Kickstarter and quietly stopped the campaign because they weren't getting the kind of traction they wanted. Can you tell me about why you chose Kickstarter and how that helped or hindered, in fact?
Yeah, so I just told you the story of Workshop Tactics. And Piptecks doesn't exist yet. It was just workshop.com. It was just...
so Workshop Tactics is one of your decks, and that's the one you've done.
This was the deck I wrote. This was the first deck, and for a good while, like a good year or so, this was the business. Like, it was workshoptactics.com, and it was all about workshopping and facilitation. And I even started a little bit of a membership business around it, training people on facilitation. But I realized that my passion isn't in that. My passion was in making and marketing this, and I wanted to extend the range. And I always had that kind of in mind when I designed it originally with the naming convention, that it would kind of extend the range of topics that you could cover. And so I teamed up with a good friend of mine, Steve Rawling, to write Storyteller Tactics. And from the experience of doing a pre-sale with Workshop Tactics, it was really handy because I got the capital up front to buy the stock. I knew how much... I knew what demand I had initially to kind of serve, and it just de-risked the thing massively versus getting investment or raising debt or any other kind of method of doing that sort of thing, or reinvesting profits. Honestly, the only reason I did a Kickstarter was because I just wanted to do a Kickstarter. Like,
just to have that experience.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like a bucket list thing for I think any entrepreneurial-minded person is to do a Kickstarter, and I think there was more of a heyday of Kickstarter back then as well.
So when are we talking then?
This was, I think, 2020, I'd say, maybe. But even like late sort of teens of the 2019, I think was like when Kickstarter became mainstream and people just like understood crowdfunding and it wasn't like a niche thing anymore. We're kind of riding off that a bit. But I really wanted to do a Kickstarter because I felt like it was just, for me, it was a bucket list item. And when it actually came to doing it, what I learned about Kickstarter is that it is, in my opinion, a glorified marketing launch event. And it isn't, because how it kind of frames things is like, this product can only exist if it gets funded in this way. And it creates this all or nothing kind of drama. And that drama works because it makes people want to contribute and see something happen. And it does facilitate a pre-sale in quite a convenient way. They do take, I think it was like a quarter of your revenue they take on Kickstarter fee or something like annoying like that. So I had to weigh up, like, am I willing to let Kickstarter take that much for the potential exposure we'd get? Because there's always that chance that Kickstarter feature you, or you go on the homepage and just get that extra kind of lift. But the dirty secret behind Kickstarter,
dirty secrets.
Yeah, the dirty secret behind Kickstarter is that Kickstarters are only as successful as you're willing to make them. And what I mean by that is, by this point, Workshop Tactics is now is paying the mortgage, it's a profitable revenue generating thing. We're experimenting with Facebook ads. This is now a thing, and to actually have kind of disposable revenue to invest in the Kickstarter campaign and the way it's done. And I'm sure this is fairly common knowledge now, but to me, it was like, oh my God, Kickstarter isn't this magical thing that can propel you. You do have to put a serious amount of energy into, lighting the fire with it. And so dirty secret number one is that your financial target should be lower than what you actually want. So it's easily achievable, because a Kickstarter that gets really quick towards 90% funded, so much more energy and traffic and what kind of backers they're called.
Yeah. Is that because you just have? Is that because you innately have more things to talk about? You're talking about as a catalyst for a launch or for.
It becomes part of the story.
Sure.
We've been funded 580% over our target. Is a magical thing to say.
But that target's been something you've completely just made up.
Yeah, completely made up. And it's small and achievable enough that you will get funded, so that it does happen, and then anything's a bonus. I think the mistake people make is trying to raise a realistic amount of money, $100,000. And it's that's never, I think our target was 10 grand and we raised 100.
Right.
And so that, it kind of shows, oh my God, this thing is more popular than they even realized. But to actually get that traffic, we nurtured a mailing list for maybe 6 months leading up to it.
Wow.
And we were spending money on ads to drive email signups out the Kickstarter. Hey, we're going to be launching a Kickstarter for this soon. Sign up to get on the waiting list. So we invested loads of money prior to launching the Kickstarter. And when the Kickstarter launches, we ran Facebook ads to the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks you just do the Kickstarter, turn it on, and everything kind of solves itself. But there is a lot of money invested. And I think this is where people can make it go wrong, is that they just either break even or actually lose money on a Kickstarter. And when you hear about that, you're like, how is that possible? You just ask, hey, can you back my thing? And then turn on and let the internet do its thing. But it's no, you've got to make your campaign work. So that's why it is this glorified kind of marketing launch event. We haven't done one ever since, and we don't need to, because we have such a huge customer base now that when we launch a new deck, we
tap straight into them.
Yeah, exactly. So It's really great for kind of getting that initial traction. And so many businesses have started this way, but you need to do it with your eyes wide open about the amount of investment that it takes, because that's when things fail, is when people just don't know about that sort of thing and they turn it on. I think we maybe got featured on some page on Kickstarter for a day. The net kind of traffic gain from the Kickstarter platform was barely worth it. Kickstarter brought nothing to us that was worthwhile. So
it is doing it all yourself. And I've met a few people who are Kickstarter agents who would prep your campaigns as much as possible. And I always wonder what they kind of did. In setting up. It sounds like the good ones would have been with you for a period of time before pressing go and throughout the campaign.
Yeah. I mean, there's the fulfillment headache as well. It's okay, now you've got thousands of addresses, and then the biggest headache is when you actually come to ship, that you can't get in touch with people, or people have changed their address. I think for 2 years we were getting drips and drabs of emails saying, hey, I never got my Kickstarter thing. I'm well, your address, this was your address. Oh no, it was wrong. It was this. So there was this half-life decay of operational nightmare of doing a Kickstarter that was really tricky, but definitely wouldn't do one again. Sure.
Well, I've backed quite a few Kickstarters, and a part of that from my side is the backer is the buzz, and hopefully this thing gets into the wild and it becomes successful. But there's been more than a handful where suddenly I've got this thing through the post, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And you open it, oh, right. I'm not quite sure why I got that right now, but I hope they still survived.
Yeah.
And I often miss those backer questionnaires where it just says, just remind me where you live, please.
Yeah.
Tell us where you live. So we talked about the price of the Pip Decks, and you said it being uncomfortably higher than you thought it would be. And I think this leads into the kind of this podcast and the aha moments. And when you speak to people about why they're paying £150 for the deck, what are they saying, and what's kind of surprised you about that? What have you learned from that?
Well, this is probably the biggest aha moment I had. Was I was working on the advice that Seth Godin talks about.
Purple Cow.
Purple Cow, be remarkable, stand out. Your price is a story. Your price should create tension. High price equals high value, all this sort of thing. So I knew intuitively from being a student of Seth Godin that I couldn't just price it economically. I needed to price it as a story, and I wanted it to communicate that it is a high value thing, that even if you try and quantify the amount of time saved from not having crap meetings, like, this is a valuable thing that you could own, and I shouldn't be pricing it based on the cost of the card and the ink that was made to make it. And so and another good rule of thumb is, like, if you are uncomfortable with the price that you're, even if as a freelancer, if you don't feel slightly uncomfortable saying your fee out loud, then you're probably too cheap. So it's a good rule of thumb in general anyway. Yeah, so when it came to launching the deck, like, I just thought no one would buy it at this price, and they did, and I kind of slowly ramped the price up. But it was like, instead of discounting, it's like, well, how can you add more value? And that's where we kind of came to this kind of thing we have now, which is where we've got a library of videos for every deck, and a load of digital templates, and loads of value adds and everything. And anyway, the thing that was bugging me still the whole time was, like, I still didn't truly understand why people were spending that kind of money on the deck.
So you're glad it was happening, but also, like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah. And it was still, the sales were still happening. And so I set out on a mission to speak to as many customers as I could. And this was during the height of COVID as well, when it launched, because I thought this product's dead in the water. Like, the whole point of this is that it's going to be on someone's desk and they're going to be sharing it with other people in the office. But people kept buying it, even though everyone was in lockdown. And I think there was definitely, like, an e-commerce boom happening at that time where people just had money to burn because they weren't going out. So there was definitely, that was probably a part of it. But yeah, so I think I spent 6 weeks speaking to like 2 or 3 customers a day, and it was exhausting being on Zoom that much. But I was basically proverbially, like, shaking the shoulders of my customers saying, why did you buy this? Like, what is going on? And from my, like, UX research experience, if you ask someone, like, why did you do that? Saying why is a very pointy kind of way.
It's almost accusatory, isn't it?
Yeah. So what you do is say, like, what made you do that? Or what was the thing that sort of made you take that leap? And asking these kind of why questions in lots of different ways. And, like, if you keep asking why enough, you kind of get to the root cause. Because the first thing people say is, like, oh, it's, great kind of inspiration, and, I just wanted some more tools for my toolkit for workshopping. And I'm like, yeah, but you're a facilitator that's been doing this for 20 years, and you know everything in here already. So, like, what made you buy it for that reason? And some of the things they were saying were like, well, there might be something in here I don't know. Like, they had FOMO. Like, there was a bit of a FOMO thing going on. And then the other thing was...
there's a bit of humility to that, though, isn't there? Of people like I accept I don't know everything. Maybe there's something to learn.
Well, the other side of that is that there were people who were very experienced, but they had such huge imposter syndrome that they really felt seen and validated, that everything they were doing was now in this, like, official kind of box. It's like, oh, this is great. Like, now I feel like what I'm doing is legit.
Sure.
And so at the heart of it, what I wasn't selling, content on cards. I was selling confidence in a box. Because these people, whilst they had these big job titles and whilst they had loads of experience, they still felt anxious and not confident, and they had imposter syndrome, and they bought this thing as an emotional crux, really. And it just so happened to also be useful, but that's when, like, everything changed with the marketing, because it was no longer like 54 workshop techniques in a box. It was now like catapult your career and become more confident in your career. And we're now selling the emotion of the thing rather than the function of the thing.
And how did that affect your, I guess, your bottom line, your sales, and your North Star metric when you learned, first of all, absorbed what your customers are saying, and then put that into their own words and into the marketing, into your assets?
Well, I can't recall like the exact kind of uplift of conversion or anything like that, but I do remember the feeling of how much more easily sales happened as a result.
So the friction between the sales happening melted away, basically.
Yeah, and it kind of just it just doubled down on like the reason why people were buying it. I think even Workshop Tactics has the same landing page as it had 3 or 4 years ago, which says like career confidence in a box. Storytellers about becoming a more confident storyteller, and it is all about confidence. And that started to make me realize that when I was seeing these initial people using the prototype of Workshop Tactics, I was seeing people who were really quite shy, like lead a workshop for the first time, and then seeing the result of that was like, wow, that's really amazing that you've done that. And they're like, well, I did it because I had these cards, and I just didn't really think anything of it at the time. But now to see that happening at scale, where it's like, this is actually having a genuine impact on people, it suddenly went from like, me following my curiosity and accidentally growing this business to now realizing like, okay, I'm actually doing something meaningful in the world, and I can kind of get behind that and like lean into it. So yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing for us, and it really has set the trajectory of the whole company with that kind of insight. Because like even the illustrations, intuitively, I was trying to make this approachable and not like corporate and stuffy.
Are they your illustrations specifically?
No, they're by a good friend of mine called David Hill, but we have different illustrators for different decks. We're trying to kind of like the Spider-Verse, trying to have different illustration styles, but with the same characters. And
that's an animation callback there, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing the kind of aha moments that you've had related to Pip Decks. Before we go, Charlie, I just want to ask you what's next in store for Pip Decks. So what we've got in line. You always got ideas for new decks coming out.
Yeah.
So yeah, where are you going in the next few months?
So we've got a couple new decks coming out in the new year. One of which is incredibly exciting. It's called Negotiation Tactics. And this has been authored by a hostage negotiator who has involved in over 700 hostage negotiation situations in her career.
As in like real guns to the head.
She's negotiated with ISIS and Al Qaeda.
Wow, okay.
And so she's worked with us to kind of help bridge all of her knowledge in negotiation into the kind of world of like business negotiation. And it's phenomenal. Like spending time with her name's Sue Williams, like has just been like being on a negotiation kind of boot camp. And the kind of things you learn are like, wow, like there are people walking around not knowing this stuff. Like it feels dangerous to know how to negotiate really well, to the point where it's like everyone needs to know this. Everyone needs to be on the same level playing field, because if you don't have any negotiation skills or experience and you're negotiating with someone that does, like it's game over. Like it's not fair. So anyway, that deck's coming out, so hopefully we'll level the playing field for everyone. And then in the new year as well, we're going to be exploring opening up a thing called Pip Decks Pro, which is like a membership for Pip Decks where you can access all of the decks digitally, and basically making the physical decks more purchasable would be probably the best way of describing it in terms of price and bundling and things like that. So yeah, a lot of things in development. But
do people own all the decks, even though or more than one deck, even though they don't need it?
Yeah, they do. They do, and this is kind of there's trade-offs to everything, right? So one of the kind of most valuable bundles we have on the website is that you can get 50% off if you buy all the decks. So people buy all the decks. I think people do that. Obviously, there's a massive price saving, but there's also, I think the nature of the product is like you just want to collect them all and have them all, and not have a missing deck from your collection. Like I think there's a cognitive bias there. I can't remember what it's called, where you just can't have an incomplete collection.
Well, there's that. I think it leads into the FOMO that you found out because of interviews. Like, oh, there's another deck. Even if I only need one line of one card, maybe I need to get this.
Yeah, and you might, and for people like me who hoard stuff, you might need it one day. It might be useful one day, so you kind of want to have it anyway. So yeah, people do buy them all, but the problem is that when they then get them all in the post, it can be really overwhelming. It's like, okay, where do I start? Like, which deck should I look at? And so we're doing some work around trying to help people get started with the decks a bit more. But I think there needs to be a shift from us to start, maybe it's actually not in our interest to sell everything all at once to someone. So there's, some definitely interesting kind of commercial innovation happening from us about, balancing kind of user need and business need. Like the business wants to make money, but the user shouldn't be overwhelmed with the thing they've bought.
Yeah.
And unless we're building like that kind of onboarding experience into the product, it can be damaging for the brand, for them to buy everything and then be overwhelmed. So kind of an interesting problem to explore.
Well, whenever that launches, do let me know, and I'll share it with as many people as we can do. Where can people find you online? What is the Pip Decks website? People want to go there and buy it right now, for example.
Yeah, it's Pip Decks, and I think you can get it on Amazon US right now. But
okay.
We ship worldwide from piptecks.com.
Fantastic. And all those details will be in the show notes. And if you want to go on Instagram at PipDecksHQ. Charlie, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Thanks, Kobi. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode, guys. This is my set of Pip Decks I bought recently, and I'm going to use it in the next couple of days because I'm running a workshop. This is the one that Charlie actually authored himself. This is the first set of Pip Decks before it even had the name Pip Decks, if you recall in the conversation. That's it for now from me. Do like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, save this episode in YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, wherever you're listening to or whatever you're watching this. It really does help us get more and more people watching the podcast. If you have any questions, do send me a DM, do comment, and if you want to get in contact with myself or Charles on the basis of this episode, all the details to get in contact with us are in the show notes below. See you for the next episode.